Today is our kickoff session for Transitional English. We are so happy you're here. Today, in our first chunk of learning, we are going to be digging into some concepts such as the PWR Act. We're going to be talking about the Transitional English philosophy, and we're going to be orienting you and kind of talking about the Competencies and Policies document, as well as how your partnerships are using that document to move your work ahead. So I want you to consider, and you can be thinking about this now, and these might be great questions to take back to your partnership, because partnerships are the heartbeat, and we'll talk more about partnerships next time. They are the heartbeat of this work. A good curriculum and preparing students for that post-secondary success cannot happen without strong partnerships between secondary and post-secondary. So I want you to think about, how has your partnership defined the Transitional English experience? Who are your Transitional English students? We've had lots of conversations at the state level about this and really kind of providing an accurate picture or vision for what that looks like. But how are you talking about that? How are you identifying and serving students who may not be prepared for college level coursework? What exactly are you preparing students for? I'm sure they themselves would ask that question. What does a different experience look like? So we already mentioned increased nonfiction texts. So when we think about some of those instructional shifts, how does this course differ from a regular English course? And how have we started to shape this work, not only within our partnership, but then for some of you within your building? So, these might be, if you're looking for talking points to take back to your building or to your partnerships, these might be a good springboard. I'm going to start with kind of a 50,000 foot view, just so everybody has some context. I think oftentimes we get into some of these endeavors and we're thinking, why on earth are we doing this? So when we think about the kind of impetus and the start of all of this, we really started with the post-secondary Workforce Readiness Act, otherwise known as the PWR Act. And this was actually signed several years ago, pre-pandemic, before our lives changed even further in 2016. And the piece of legislation that was passed was really to kind of rethink how and what we're preparing students for. So we all know that college is a really expensive career exploration endeavor. And so how do we engage students while they're still in high school to kind of be thinking about what their next steps are, whether that's a 2 or a 4-year institution, whether that's going into a trades program to get a certificate, really kind of talking about where they are, where they want to go, and then how do we get them there? And so there are 4 different components of this PWR Act. The first is the post-secondary and career exploration piece, so otherwise known as the PACE document. So that is intentionally planning career exploration activities. We in our area even encourage as early as kindergarten. How are we giving students those opportunities to find out about the world around them and what those possibilities are? Also included in the Act was a pilot of the competency-based kind of learning model for high schools. In our area, we have one high school who is currently piloting that competency-based philosophy for students in their English courses. We also have pathway endorsement programs. Some of you might have heard of House Bill 3296, which was just recently passed in our spring legislative session, which for the graduating class of 2030, our schools and districts need to be building at least 3 pathway endorsement programs for those students. But that's all about getting early college coursework and getting kind of some experience in that career field that they want to go into. And the 4th piece is transitional coursework. We know that transitional math was implemented a few years ago. Transitional math is required by law. Transitional English at this time is not. But we do know that transitional English is equally important and just as strong a predictor of student success post-secondary as math is. And so What's exciting about this is that unlike transitional math, we have a huge opportunity in front of us because we already have a 4-year English graduation requirement in the state of Illinois. So sometimes it's a matter of rethinking what we're doing to make sure that we are embedding those competencies and making some of those instructional shifts to be aligned with transitional English. To get students that completion on their transcript so that they can have portability and enter into credit-bearing coursework in college. So the data around this, I actually just went through and I pulled Illinois report card data last night, and I averaged about 7 years of report card data. And on average, there's usually about 45% of students who graduate and are placed into remedial education at the post-secondary level. My daughter was one of those students in math. And let me tell you, that can be a really traumatic experience for a student. And oftentimes they get stuck in developmental coursework. They spend a lot of time, they spend a lot of money, and they may or may not be able to work themselves out of it. And so really, when we think about remediating some of these statistics that you see in front of you, it's being prevention focused. So what are we doing in high school to make sure that we are addressing these statistics that we're seeing with remedial education, that we're seeing as far as matriculation and retention rates in college and in filling some of those much needed jobs in our workforce, because a lot of them are going to require some sort of post-secondary education in order to be able to meet the demands of those jobs. So there's a lot of things that we're looking at and talking about. Plus, we know from the pandemic, students are different. A lot of our high school students, I've even talked to 5th graders who have said, I don't see what the purpose of school is. I don't know why I'm here. I don't want to be here. So is there a way that we can establish that purpose and that excitement and that trajectory for them to be working towards something? And so I think that transitional English is an important piece of that, to be able to see that relevance in their education and to be working toward their career exploration endeavors. So this is where we start talking about transitional English. Transitional English is, as I said, an important piece of the puzzle because we want to make sure that students have those reading, writing, communication skills to be successful no matter where they go after they graduate from high school, whether that's a 2 or a 4-year institution across the state of Illinois. So before I get into the document, which is going to be hyperlinked for you on this slide, I'm going to just kind of jump ahead, and I want to share with you the process that we followed for this. So I mentioned that partnerships earlier were really important. And the partnership piece in the development of these competencies and the competencies document was also very, very important. So I was blessed to be a part of this group that met just before the world ended in 2019, 2020. And so there was a group that was assembled in Bloomington, which consisted of high school administrators, English teachers, community college, higher education university faculty, who all got together and said, what are those expectations that we have for students that would best prepare them to be successful in credit-bearing coursework beyond high school? And so through that work and collaboration, and in partnership with ISB, ICCB, and the Illinois Board of Higher Education, we were able to draft some competencies, which were put out for public feedback in the summer of 2020, and then were later finalized and adopted after public comment was received. So this was a collaborative effort to really kind of think through all of those important components for student success. So I want to kind of get us into that document to make sure we know how to access it and maybe have some conversations about how are we talking about these competencies and key performance indicators within our partnership and our work together. So there are, in general, different kinds of competencies that are in this document. We have content competencies. So those content competencies are going to address reading and writing. They are going to address critical thinking and analysis. We also have process competencies. And process competencies are equally important. Process competencies are really kind of working to make sure students develop some of those essential employability skills, to develop metacognition, which is thinking about their own thinking, to really kind of make them well-rounded learners and employees and adults. And so the graphic that we use in the competencies and policies document is very important because it shows the intersection between reading and writing and the relationship that all of these content competencies have with the process competencies. So as you can see here, we have reading and writing. But the big conversation in our work and development process was it's nice to have reading and writing skills, but it is more important for the work we are asking students to do to have this intersection, this nexus of critical thinking and analysis. So how are those two pieces being put together within the classroom environment to really increase rigor and depth of thinking? With complex texts, right? We saw in the chat earlier that we are focusing on complex informational text in this course. And so how are we doing that to also include and really prioritize critical thinking and analysis through reading and writing? Around the outer circle here, we have the metacognition and the essential skills, which are, again, our process competencies. And they are just kind of the quiet heartbeat of the course. This is something that we're going to be doing every day, getting students to think about their thinking, to get students to collaborate with one another, to listen to one another, to speak effectively to one another, to practice problem solving. And so those things are going to encompass everything that we do. So all of these are very nicely spelled out within our competencies and policies document, which looks a little bit like this. And I'll open up the full document here in just a moment. So this is what a page looks like within the competencies and policies document. The content competency is here up at the top. So it says students can consider reading and writing tasks and adapt their approaches and strategies. So what does this look like in English? Well, or excuse me, in reading. So, well, in reading, they are employing appropriate pre-reading and active reading strategies. They're recognizing and using text characteristics. They're using a text structural characteristics in order to make meaning. And in writing, they can identify an audience, purpose, and context of a writing task. So what we've taken is this kind of larger umbrella competency, and we've broken it down into what we're calling key performance indicators, which are these finer grain size, and they are serving as look-fors within the course in order to make a judgment about that competency. And we'll talk a lot more about how we can use these coming up in some later sessions. So there is a difference between a competency and a key performance indicator. Competencies are a little bit bigger and it's a broad learning goal, whereas a key performance indicator is a smaller grain size. It's usually a little bit more quantifiable in terms of measuring and evaluating success. So I'm going to open up, when you have access to the slides, you can click, you can see there's a hyperlink here, and this will take you to the full document. So when you're looking at this document, this is probably going to be the most referenced document that you will have at your fingertips. I go to it all the time, as well as the transitional math document. The first part of this document gives an overview again of the process that was followed to develop the competencies and the key performance indicators. We have our ever exciting table of contents here, but let me scroll down. Talking a little bit, and we'll come back to this document and get a little deeper with it when we talk about partnerships components and so forth. But we have some front matter here, kind of talking about the philosophy of the course. Probably one of the most important pieces is the integration of those content competencies that we just talked about. We also have some guidance here on text materials and grading. So we'll again come back to that at a later time. And here's that graphic that I just showed you. So here is the full page of those competencies and key performance indicators. So these are going to be really well referenced. Here we have some of our process competencies. So for example, here, planning and monitoring, this one's set up a little bit differently. Students can construct and monitor an adaptive plan of action to structure their learning processes using reading, writing, or critical thinking skills. These are the key performance indicators. These are the look-fors. We do not directly assess these. It's not like we would give a quiz to a student on metacognition, but these might be things that we informally or formatively give feedback to students on. And definitely we want to be mindful of planning activities that really emphasize these process competencies, because that is what the portability panel will be looking for to create that different experience for students. I'll share really quickly, one of the ways that we use this document is, I can't underscore enough shared language. So we sat down between high school and our community college faculty, and we talked through what each of those meant. So what does it mean? What does it mean to us? And we reached consensus on that, and we identified key language that we might need to define for the rest of our stakeholders. One of the other ways that we use the document is we took the competencies and the key performance indicators, and we crosswalked it with our Illinois learning standards. That is a resource because we are embedding this in a fourth-year English course that will be really important, I think, to our high school administrators as well as any other stakeholders at the secondary level to know that we are still addressing our Illinois learning standards. So we did do our crosswalk, and that'll be something that I'll share with you a little later on in our journey. We also eventually use this document to create some rubrics for our student work and assessment. So there's lots of things that we can do to build understanding and to build some of those work products together to think about what transitional English might look like moving forward. So some are really simple, some are a little bit more complex. Anyone else have any ways that they've used it? Mary, go ahead.
We borrowed from the transitional math initiative at our school. They had worked with high schools, and they came up with what they called a guidebook, I think.
Okay.
And we just followed their format and of course filled in with English stuff. Honestly, we used the PWR Act document liberally in our guidebook, but what we tried to do was to set up some of the things that we will have to do when we create a curriculum or when we work on a curriculum together. So so it really became, it really becomes a guide for what you're doing.
I think that's a great start. And I think documenting some of those conversations and putting together some kind of guidebook, I think that's a great thing, because then you ensure that there's some consistency and shared commitments. So that's wonderful. So maybe for some of you, if you are further ahead in the process and you haven't kind of taken a shared read of that document together, that might be a place to go back to. If you haven't started this journey at all, it's a great place to start. Lots of great information in there to make sure that we are all on the same bus and facing forward. So that is hyperlinked for you in the slides here in case you have trouble finding it. A couple more conversations before we wrap up today. One of the biggest conversations, especially if you are sitting on this call as a guidance counselor, is who on earth do we enroll in this class? And this has been a very sprightly, I think, conversation. We always talk about this. What is the best fit? Because recruitment is a piece of this. Now, recruitment for transitional English is easier, I think, than transitional math, just because it's naturally a fourth year English course. But where does this, who are we enrolling? And for some of you from the administrative side of things, you might think, well, what course would this fit into? With some modifications to that course to better address the competencies. Is this a new course that we're adding to our course catalog? So, these are all things to start thinking about. This is what we're calling the best fit profile for schools and students. And this was created by one of our leadership teams. We have a phenomenal group that meets regularly to kind of talk about transitional English and the resources that we need to develop. This is very small, so I'm going to blow up my screen just a little bit. When you think about that best fit for students, we're looking for high school seniors who are not already enrolled in early college coursework, whether that's AP or a dual credit course. We're looking at this course as a way to accelerate that learning for students so that they are successful day one in a college level credit bearing course. So if they are moving on to the post-secondary level and they're going to be taking obviously a credit bearing English course or composition, they would really benefit from this course. We also don't want to disclude students who have IEPs. Accommodations are still in play for some of these students. But what we can't do is we cannot change the rigor or the expectations of the course. So we can allow for things to promote accessibility, like extra time and so forth, maybe using graphic organizers or sentence stems, but we want to avoid changing or modifying the rigor of the course, because then the course tends to lose its potency, if you will. So, this is not a remedial course. So, if you have students with IEPs, this might be a good fit for them if they can kind of perform at that level, if we can bring them up. But it is not intended to be it's not a developmental course. Okay. So this might be a good talking point within your schools and in your partnerships to really kind of think about who are you marketing this course to and where does that fit within your course catalog and some of your course offerings. So this document is also hyperlinked for you here on this slide. If you click best fit profile at the bottom of the slide, it will take you to the full document, which you can print out and use to have some more intensive conversations. We do talk a lot about this because we want to make sure that we have students in the most appropriate course to give them the most access to success. And then before I kind of stop talking and I open it up for any kind of questions to conclude our hour together here on the Spine Tuesday, I kind of want to get us started thinking about the types of experiences and the kinds of shifts that we are going to be seeing in transitional English. Transitional math, if you're part of any of those conversations, that was a major shift because we are putting that cognitive load on the students and really kind of thinking from a task-based learning perspective. Transitional English is similar. So we have some shifts that we're going to have to work through. So in this course, as you're thinking about where it fits, who the students are, we need to know that we are going to be asking students to grapple with college level texts of different types. So that includes charts, tables, graphs, posters, music, pictures, journal articles. And the primary focus of those is on nonfiction. Now we have seen some, I'm on the portability panel for the state. We have seen submissions that have some poetry or some short stories sprinkled in just to kind of round out that body of the text set, which we'll talk a little bit more in coming sessions. But we're really focusing on nonfiction to bolster student success moving into post-secondary. And when we're thinking about that from the developers or the teacher lens, we want to make sure that those texts are engaging to students, the writing is engaging to students, that it offers choice. And really, if we're thinking about our students, we want to make sure that we are engaging them and making sure that it's related to some of those life or career goals or experiences that they'll be facing in the future. So we've seen a lot of submissions on identity and equity and community building. So we've seen some of these really big global important themes that students are really buying into. We know that students are facing a much longer career trajectory of about 70 years, a 70-year work life in their future. And so we are going to try our best to prepare them for all of the possibilities. But we really need to make sure that what we're doing has that relevance and is allowing for them to grow in those ways. So in order to do that, I want you to start thinking about how do we create these high level learning experience that really promotes student thinking and reasoning. That we saw very clearly in that diagram earlier, where the focus is on metacognition, the focus is on critical thinking and analysis, as opposed to some of those tasks like vocabulary worksheets and grammar quizzes that perhaps are very routine and procedural in nature and not connected to something that students feel is important or engaging to them. So we're going to start kind of thinking in that direction. And we know that the research supports that. John Hattie has a lot of research. He likes to do meta-analyses, which is research on research. And of course, he's finding that some of those really important components that we'll kind of see coming to the forefront of transitional English and transitional math are classroom discussion, cooperative learning, classroom cohesion, persistence and engagement. Those things are going to help to grow students beyond his research hinge point of 0.40, which indicates that it is rather significant in impacting a student's growth and development. And then we have to ask ourselves, what is our role? Our role isn't to do the heavy lifting or the sit-ups. Our role is to be that personal trainer and to really push and encourage those kids. We have to think about the changing roles and dynamics within our classroom and what our role as educators is. And we'll be exploring that more as we kind of move through our learning together. All of this, of course, is in service of those competencies that we took a look at earlier, really kind of thinking about how we're getting to the integration of reading and writing through critical thinking and analysis, and really taking the time to get students to think about their thinking, why they're using the strategies that they're using, and what are those skills that are going to best prepare them, those soft skills for employment, college, life. So those are some of the big shifts that we're seeing from an instructional perspective. So I talked about a lot in our 1 hour together. So let me take just the last couple of minutes of our time together this afternoon and open it up to any immediate thoughts, reactions, questions that we maybe need to address moving forward, because next week we'll go a little deeper down the rabbit's hole together.
One thing I'm looking for, will you go over how, do you have resources that show how high schools have been able to, like, I think I understand who the students we would target would be. It's just, how do we target them their junior year, like ahead of the senior process? That's like I'm most interested in, because we start choosing, we'd have to have those students choose this class at the end of their fall semester in junior year. So like, I want to know how to work with teachers, vertically to target those students, if that makes sense.
That makes
I don't want to take up too much time. I know it's 4:30, but
no.
that's one thing I've been wanting.
And that makes total sense. And you're right. We do have to do that with transitional math as well. And so that is part of that readiness work and conversation. That's part of the partnership. When we look at, for example, transitional math, we're looking at course grades, we're looking at performance on SAT. Are they projected to be college and career ready? And so kind of looking at some of those metrics together as a partnership is going to be really important. And we can dig deeper into that, because I do have a piece when we start talking about the syllabus and we start talking about some of those portability components. I do have a piece in there where we can kind of talk about the work that has to happen ahead of actually handing the students the syllabus and saying, congratulations for being enrolled in this course. So yes, we can talk more in depth about that next time we're together, and I will bring some resources with me that we've used and talked about so that I can share. I think that's a great point, because recruitment and conversations with parents and students in this process is so important. Yes. I am really looking forward to all of our conversations moving forward. I think you are going to be super excited about everything that we're up to in transitional English. And I can't wait to hear more from all of you about all of the great work that you're doing. So thank you. We'll wrap it up for today and see you back here next week.